It's Damn, 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 damn show. Damn, 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 damn show.
The Memoirs of Monty Oxymoron, Part 2. How I Got Into Punk. Or 1, 2, 3, 4. I was religiously listening to John Peel every night by 1976. And in that autumn I heard something I'd never heard before. At that time I was a bit of an intellectual snob about music. On being asked if I liked Mott the Hoople, for example, I had said, that's too primitive. What a twat. Music had to be complex, virtuosic, full of allusions to classical music and jazz, replete with references to mythology and full of complex electronic instrumentation. When I first heard The Damned on John Peel, it challenged all these assumptions. It was raw, rough, powerful, and yes, I guess primitive. But boy, was it effective. The Damned were definitely the first punk music that I heard. Soon other bands were to follow, and the trickle of new music became a deluge. Mr. Peel took on the new movement with gusto, and we soon realised that it had its own style, fashion, artwork and attitude to go with the music. It was a real shock to the system, but you couldn't ignore it. It was so much more exciting than anything else going on. There was bland rock aplenty, and by that I mean mostly American country rock, and disco, which I couldn't stand. Prog rock was definitely in decay generally. ELP released their first album in a while, Works, which didn't work. I didn't mind the single, Fanfare for the Common Man, but the album version had a genuinely horrid keyboard solo, extended of course, in the middle. It sounded like Keith was playing a kind of giant plastic harmonica, a real aesthetic misjudgment. Apart from his piano concerto, basically a solo piece, I didn't like the album, and it perfectly illustrated the inflated, fatuous state that prog rock had gotten itself into by then. Genesis sounded bland to me, yes, sugary and sickly, and even the great Pink Floyd had used up their best ideas. There was no choice but to see what the new wave had to offer, and there was plenty. I recorded the first Stranglers session on John Peel with my Grundig reel-to-reel tape recorder with a microphone to the speaker. I also heard and liked Television Screen by the Radiators from Space and bought it, my first punk single. There were lots of singles coming out, sometimes by bands that never produced an album. Television Screen, like Neat Neat Neat, was basically speeded up rock and roll, great fun. Soon after that we were buying all sorts of singles. Before that I only used to bother with albums. We discovered a band called The Valves, who did a single about falling in love with a robot girl from outer space. And the B-side, Adolf was a piss artist! Fantastic. I didn't really dress the part though then. I am afraid I was an anorak boy. I didn't want to be noticed, in case I got beaten up or laughed at. I had such low self-esteem. I did paint psychedelic mushrooms on my school bag though, and during the punk age these were augmented by the names of punk bands and a photo that Henry, my school friend, took of me, sitting dejectedly outside a derelict house with "Still empty, why?" sprayed on the door. Also a sign my uncle Damien gave me, written in blue, that said, "Help the police, beat yourself up!" We were still pretty young, and the media was hyping up punk as being a violent movement, so initially I was nervous of connecting with people involved in it. I still used to identify with the older kids, who were basically hippies. We got on with the older boys in the upper years much better than our contemporaries, who seemed to be only into football and disco and or bland rock. For example, there was a school band, you see, and we were excited to see if we could join in, as they had real electric instruments instead of toys and homemade stuff like we had, and a drum kit instead of cardboard boxes. However, when we attended their rehearsal to investigate, we found them trying to play Layla by Eric Clapton over and over and over and over and over again. Very, very badly. What a disappointment. I tried wearing a shirt with psychedelic stars and a gnome hat and doing some poetry a la Alain, which didn't go down too well. Another time I picked up the guitar and I thrashed out a furious riff. "Stop playing that punk rubbish," said Dominic Turner, clearly of the clap-out school of blandism. How to square the circle of liking the older psychedelic and progressive music while embracing punk? The music papers all took the same line. The older music was old, past it, stuff for old farts. I didn't agree at all. I saw punk just as the next phase of musical revelation. There was good and bad in the old and the new forms. Everyone was raving about the Clash in the music papers, but I couldn't see much in them. I much preferred the Damned, the Stranglers, who, like an obscure band called The Edge, featuring Lou Edmonds, had a keyboard player, and the more obscure bands that released singles. One such was Death to Disco by the Not Sensibles. "I'm sick and tired of that disco soul. It's a sound that really annoys me. Not enough to satisfy, just enough to drive me insane. Fantastic!"
Damn, 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 damn.